Back home now, and the quasi-election campaign over the carbon tax continues with claims and counterclaims from both sides.
Yesterday, a group of leading economists attending a conference came out in support of the government's move to price carbon, with 60% saying the plan is good economic policy. Greg Hunt is the opposition spokesman for climate action, and he joins us now from Canberra. Greg Hunt, good morning.
And good morning, Waleed.
Clearly, if you believe the polling, the public is on your side quite well in the carbon tax debate, but it seems that the experts, both climate scientists and economists, are even more emphatically against you. Why is that?
Well, I have to say that it feels very much like the home insulation program, where I did speak to the author of the survey last night, Bruce Chapman. I respect his credentials. He's a former political advisor to Paul Keating. And I did ask whether any of those surveyed had spoken out against the home insulation program, and there was a stony silence. So the public got it right there. And on this occasion, I also note that the survey was taken without any reference to the fact that there's a $4.3 billion fiscal hole in the government's package, the fact that 75% of emissions reduction under the government's package would actually come from direct action approaches which would bring down emissions. Only 25% of emissions reduction comes from the tax itself, and that by 2020 we'll be buying 100 million tonnes from offshore, including basically $3.5 billion going offshore every year. And now we know from today's papers that that will rise to an offshore purchase of $57 billion in 2010 terms by 2050. In other words, a massive national black hole. None of those facts were given to the economists before they were asked to vote.
Sorry, are you suggesting they don't know the details of the policy, that they don't know, for instance, that the tax is giving out more in compensation and programs than it's taking? They didn't know that when they were responding to these questions?
Well, this question was given within 24 hours of the details being released. So
sure,
I suspect that most of them probably hadn't had.
Well, even someone like me knew those details about 10 minutes after the details were released. So I'm sure some economists would know.
So did you know that we'd be purchasing $3.5 billion of foreign carbon credits within 10 minutes of the package being released?
I'm talking about, you referred to a $4 billion black hole. I assume what you mean by that is that the government is giving out more than it's receiving, to the tune of $4 billion, and it outlined in the announcement that it was doing that and where that would fall within the budget cycle. So I hardly think these are things that were esoteric details that weren't available to economists.
I think that both economists and the Australian public would be surprised to know that the foreign carbon credit purchases will be 60% of Australia's total emissions reduction in 2020. Apologies, $3.5 billion in 2020, rising to a massive national black hole of purchasing $57 billion in current terms from foreign carbon traders by 2050.
But
it's
these are
extraordinary.
These are points you made probably an hour after the announcement of the government. The economists would have known this, and yet when they were asked, they voted overwhelmingly to say that they prefer the government's package to yours. The statistics, in fact, are pretty damning. I mean, around 85% of those surveyed thought your policy wasn't good economic policy. What this leads me to is wondering whether or not there are any circumstances in which you'd actually listen to these economists.
Well, I will put it in these terms, that I did ask whether any of those surveyed managed to make the comment in advance of the home insulation program, the Green Loans program, or the school hall programs all going bad, because the public identified those problems, we identified those problems, and I would encourage you to ask Bruce Chapman when you interview him later today as to whether a single one of the economists surveyed publicly stated that these programs were badly constructed. It's a good common sense test.
You're comparing apples and oranges here, though, because here's a circumstance where they were surveyed about their response to a particular issue. You're comparing that with whether or not they voluntarily spoke out about a different program. If they were surveyed on that program and reached a conclusion that was at odds with the public and the public turned out to be right, you may have the ghost of a point. But it seems that that's not the case here. And what I'm interested in is the fact that this seems to be a repeated pattern. Every time economists are asked their opinion on the subject, they seem to come up with something close to an ETS. And so surely you can understand...
Well, that's not true.
Okay,
that is not true, Waleed, because let me tell you this with great respect. 3 Nobel economic laureates, Finn Kydland, Vernon Smith, Thomas Schelling, did a full analysis, and these are all, like myself, strong believers in climate change. They looked for the most economically sensible policies. They examined the full range. The carbon tax, out of the 15 they analysed, was the worst, the second worst, the third worst, and the fourth worst, which is why there's no other country in the world which has a remotely comparable system to the one which has been announced on the weekend in Australia.
Well, I mentioned an ETS, you've just mentioned a carbon tax. They're slightly different things.
Well, let me give you an example. Sometimes people talk about the United States. The cap-and-trade system, which is their equivalent of a carbon tax, is dead. Japan, it's off the table. Canada, it's gone. Korea, it's been deferred. And what we see in Europe, and this is a fascinating point, is the European system has raised revenue of about $1 per person per year over the last 5 years. The Australian system will raise $400 per person. It is about 400 times heavier per person than the European system. It is the difference between a bowling ball and a pea. They are planets apart.
Of course, the European system is in the process of being reviewed, and we'll have to see what comes out of that review. I just want to go to the political side of your campaign against the carbon pricing plan for the moment. So far, the emphasis has been on suggesting that there are divisions within the Labor Party over this, particularly those who are in seats that have steel and coal manufacturing. Isn't this a difficult argument, though, for you to run when the most obvious divisions to the public are actually within your own party? And here I note particularly Malcolm Turnbull's previous position and his not-so-subtle swipe at Tony Abbott yesterday.
Look, my understanding, because I haven't seen his material directly, but my understanding is that he, sorry about that, reaffirmed support for the policy. End of story. Now, the fascinating thing, though, is that...
Well, it wasn't the end of the story.
We've seen Anna Bligh, John Robertson, Lara Giddings. We've seen union leaders such as the head of the Transport Workers Union all call into question the government's policy. So we are very, very strong and committed to action, but in a way which doesn't involve $57 billion to foreign carbon traders, and in a way which doesn't involve $515 for starters per family, and increasing the marginal tax rates from 15 to 19% and 30 to 33%.
Well, marginal tax rates, not effective tax rates. There's a sleight of hand there. If you're so united on this, if Malcolm Turnbull's position on this is completely solid with you, are you prepared to give MPs a conscience vote on this and see if they'll cross the floor against your position?
Look, this is a policy issue. Conscience votes are about issues such as abortion or capital punishment. This is an economic policy issue. As I say, it's about $3.5 billion to foreign carbon traders in 2020 and $57 billion to foreign carbon traders in 2050.
Greg Hunt, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks for your time and all the best getting over that cough.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Waleed.
Not at all. No need to apologise.
It happens to the best of us.
It does. Now,